My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 27 years old. Last week, my father passed away, leaving a hole in my heart that I wasn't sure would ever heal. Standing under the gray sky at his funeral, I felt a strange mix of sadness and loneliness. I thought losing him would be the hardest thing I'd ever face, but I had no idea what was coming next. As the final prayers were said, I glanced over at my stepsister, Lisa. She was 30, just 3 years older than me, but we had never been close. She stood a few feet away, her face dry and expressionless, while I struggled to keep my tears from falling. When the ceremony ended, she approached me with a smirk I knew all too well. "Dad left you something," she said, holding a small wooden box in her hands. Her tone was sharp, almost mocking. "He told me to give this to you." I blinked at her, confused. "What about the inheritance?" I asked, my voice trembling. Dad had always promised that his hard-earned money would be split between us. I'd never cared about the money, but now, I needed it to get back on my feet. Lisa's smirk widened. "Oh, that? Dad left the $10 million to me. Guess he thought I'd do better with it." My stomach dropped. "What?" I whispered. "That can't be true." "It's all in the will," she said with a shrug, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You can check if you want, but it's legal. All you get is this old box." She shoved it into my hands and walked away without another word. I stared at the box, my hands shaking. It was small and worn, with a rusty latch that squeaked when I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a black and white photograph of my dad standing next to a man I didn't recognize. The paper had just one line written on it in my father's familiar handwriting. "Emily, this will lead you to what truly matters." I didn't understand what it meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this box was more important than it seemed. Dad had always been a man of secrets, and it looked like he'd left one final mystery for me to solve. As I closed the box and held it close, I made a promise to myself. Lisa might have taken the money, but I wouldn't let her take my father's legacy. Whatever he had hidden, I was going to find it. Later that night, I sat in my small apartment, the box on the table in front of me. The photograph and the note felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand. My father wasn't the type to leave things to chance. If he'd written that note, he wanted me to follow it. The man in the photograph stood out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a serious expression. I flipped the picture over, hoping to find something written on the back. To my surprise, there was a name, Henry Blackwell. That name meant nothing to me, but I knew where to start. My dad's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, might have answers. He'd handled all of Dad's affairs, including the will. If anyone knew who Henry Blackwell was, it would be him. The next morning, I called Mr. Thompson's office and explained what I'd found. He agreed to meet me right away. When I arrived, he greeted me with a warm smile, though his eyes were cautious. "Emily," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man." "Thank you," I said quietly. "I found something he left for me, and I was hoping you could help." I handed him the photograph and waited as he studied it. His brow furrowed, and he leaned back in his chair. "Henry Blackwell," he murmured. "I've heard that name before." "Who is he?" I asked. "He was a business partner of your father's many years ago. They worked on some big projects together before things went south." "South how?" Mr. Thompson hesitated. "I don't know all the details, but there was a falling out. They stopped speaking, and Henry disappeared. I'm surprised your father kept this photo. He never mentioned Henry to me." I nodded, trying to process what he'd said. "Do you know where I can find him?" "No," he admitted. "But your father's old office might have something." He kept records of everything there. Have you been by? I hadn't. The office was in a building downtown, one I'd avoided since his death. The thought of going there now filled me with dread, but I knew I had no choice. If Henry Blackwell was part of the mystery, the answers might be waiting for me. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, I said as I stood to leave. You've been a big help. He nodded, though his expression remained serious. Be careful, Emily. Your father's world was more complicated than you realize. Those words stayed with me as I left his office. What had my father been hiding? And why did I have the sinking feeling that uncovering the truth was going to change everything? With the photograph and note tucked safely in my bag, I headed downtown, ready to face whatever secrets my father's office held. The building that housed my father's office was old but well-maintained, with its stone facade and brass accents gleaming under the afternoon sun. I hesitated at the entrance, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. Whatever I found inside could change everything. I stepped into the lobby, where the familiar scent of polished wood and faint coffee greeted me. The receptionist, a kind older woman named Mrs. Harper, recognized me immediately. Emily, it's good to see you, she said warmly. I'm so sorry about your father. He was such a wonderful man. Thank you, I replied, forcing a small smile. I need to go through his office. Is it still as he left it? It is, she said. No one's touched a thing. Take all the time you need. I thanked her and headed to the elevator, clutching the strap of my bag tightly. The ride to the 4th floor felt like an eternity, and when the doors opened, I was hit with a wave of memories. My father had spent so much of his life here, and now it was just an empty space. The door to his office was unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered: the dark mahogany desk, the shelves lined with books and binders, the large window overlooking the city. It was like stepping into a time capsule. I began searching the room, starting with the desk. Most of the drawers contained standard office supplies, but one drawer, the bottom left, was locked. I frowned. My father rarely locked anything. I rifled through the other drawers until I found a small key tucked away in a pencil case. My hands shook slightly as I fit the key into the lock. It clicked open, revealing a stack of papers and a leather-bound notebook. The papers were contracts and financial documents, but the notebook caught my attention. Its cover was embossed with my father's initials, J.C. Carter. I opened it to find pages filled with notes, sketches, and what looked like a map. The map was rough, hand-drawn, and marked with an X in the corner. Next to it, my father had written a single line. Henry's key lies where we first built our dreams. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. What did he mean by, where we first built our dreams? And what key was he talking about? Just then, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around to see Lisa standing in the doorway, arms crossed and an annoyed look on her face. What are you doing here? She demanded. I quickly slipped the notebook into my bag. I could ask you the same thing, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Lisa stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I'm making sure you're not snooping around for something that isn't yours. Dad's office belongs to both of us, I shot back. I have every right to be here. She narrowed her eyes but said nothing. Instead, she scanned the room as if looking for something. I felt a surge of protectiveness for the notebook now hidden in my bag. Whatever secrets it held, I couldn't let her find them. Fine, she said after a moment. Do whatever you want. It's not like there's anything valuable here. With that, she turned and left, her attitude as sharp as ever. Once I was sure she was gone, I exhaled deeply. My father's message was clear: I needed to figure out where he and Henry Blackwell had started their journey. It was the next piece of the puzzle, and I wasn't about to let Lisa or anyone else stop me from finding it. I stood in my father's office, the silence pressing down on me like a heavy weight. I couldn't believe Lisa had shown up. I thought I'd have more time before she found out what I was after. But I'd learned a long time ago that nothing about Lisa was ever predictable. With the notebook tucked securely in my bag, I took one last look around the office. There had to be more here, some clue I was missing. But nothing jumped out at me. The map, the cryptic note about the key, and Henry Blackwell's name kept swirling in my mind, each one leading me down a path I wasn't sure I was ready to walk. I left the office with a heavy heart and 1,000 questions, the building's entrance closing behind me with a dull thud. The cool air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did little to clear the fog in my mind. I couldn't ignore the phrase from the notebook, where we first built our dreams. What did that mean? Had my father and Henry Blackwell worked together on a project? A place? Or was it something more personal? I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I needed a place to think, somewhere quiet. Then it hit me, the one place that had always felt like home to my father, where he'd spent countless hours, was the old cabin by the lake. It was a place he rarely talked about, but I knew it well. I'd spent summers there as a child, before things had started to change. Could it be that this cabin held the answers? Was that where they'd first built their dreams? I didn't hesitate. I started the car and drove out of the city, heading toward the lake. The trip felt like an eternity, the roads unfamiliar yet comforting in a strange way. The further I drove, the more the weight of the mystery seemed to settle on my chest. What was my father hiding? What was Henry Blackwell's role in all of this? And why was I the one being drawn into this secretive world? When I finally arrived at the cabin, it was just as I remembered, rustic, weathered, but still standing strong against the years. The air around it was still, and the trees seemed to whisper in the wind, as if they too were waiting for something to unfold. I walked up to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. My father had always kept a spare key hidden beneath a loose stone by the steps, a habit that never seemed to change. I bent down and found the stone exactly where it had always been. The key was cold and heavy in my hand as I turned it in the lock. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood and old memories. The furniture was worn but well cared for, the kind of place that felt like time had stood still. I made my way to the back of the cabin, to the small study where my father had worked. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and his old desk still stood in the corner, papers neatly stacked as if he'd only left moments ago. I pulled open the drawers, hoping for something, anything, that would explain what I was supposed to find. But it wasn't until I opened the bottom drawer that I saw it. A small, wooden box, much like the one Lisa had given me, but older. Its surface was scratched and faded, and it seemed to call out to me. I reached for it, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. Inside, there was another key, this one old, with intricate designs carved into the metal. Beside it, a small note in my father's handwriting read, "Henry's key unlocks what was lost." I held the key in my palm, my mind racing. What was lost? What had my father and Henry Blackwell been involved in? And how did this key fit into the puzzle? I knew one thing for sure, my father's secrets were far from over. The key in my palm felt heavy with unanswered questions. The intricate designs on it seemed to almost pulse with a strange energy, as if it was waiting for me to discover its purpose. What was lost? I whispered to myself, the words echoing in the empty cabin. I closed my fist around the key, my thoughts spiraling. I couldn't help but feel like I was getting closer to something monumental, something my father had hidden for a reason. But what could it be? And how was Henry Blackwell involved? I looked around the study, the room that had always been my father's sanctuary. The papers, the books, the familiar furniture, it all seemed to hold secrets. My attention shifted back to the wooden box. There had to be more. My father wouldn't have hidden just a key and a cryptic note. I began rifling through the papers on his desk, searching for any hint that might give me another clue. Most of it was business-related: contracts, financial records, notes on past projects. But then, tucked in the back of a folder labeled "Personal," I found something different. A journal. It was old, the leather cover cracked and faded with age. I opened it carefully, afraid it might fall apart in my hands. The first few pages were filled with vague entries, daily musings and notes about his work. But then, on the third page, something caught my eye. A drawing. It wasn't much, just a rough sketch of a building. But there was something about it that felt significant. The sketch showed an old warehouse, perched at the edge of a dock. On the bottom, my father had written, asterisk, where it all began. Henry's vision. Asterisk. I turned the page, my pulse quickening as I read the next entry. Asterisk, I promised Henry I'd never reveal what we found there. But now, with him gone, I wonder if it's time to tell someone. Emily deserves to know. Maybe the key will lead her there. Maybe it's time to let go. Asterisk. The entry trailed off, leaving me breathless. Where it all began, the warehouse by the dock. This was it. This was the place my father had been referring to all along. And Henry Blackwell, he was part of whatever secret was hidden there. I grabbed the journal and rushed out of the cabin, the air feeling colder now as I made my way back to the car. The warehouse could hold the answers. But I didn't know if I was ready for what I might find. The drive to the docks felt like another eternity. I passed familiar places, but my mind was too focused on the warehouse to pay attention to anything else. When I finally reached the docks, the air was thick with the smell of saltwater and oil. The warehouse stood ahead, just as my father had described, old, weathered, and seemingly abandoned. I pulled the car over and parked, the dimming light casting long shadows across the water. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped out of the car, the key still clutched tightly in my hand. The warehouse loomed ahead, its large metal doors rusted shut. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning the area. My father's words echoed in my mind, Henry's key unlocks what was lost. I walked around to the side of the building, where a small door was hidden behind some overgrown vines. It wasn't locked. As I pushed it open, the creaking sound echoed through the silence, sending a shiver down my spine. Inside, the air was damp and musty. The space was vast, with tall, empty shelves and crates scattered across the floor. My footsteps echoed as I ventured deeper into the darkened warehouse, looking for anything that could explain what had been hidden here. Then I saw it. In the far corner, partially obscured by dust and cobwebs, was an old chest. It was made of dark wood, with iron reinforcements along the edges, and a rusty lock. I approached it slowly, my breath catching in my throat. Could this be it? The thing my father had hidden all these years. I inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a turn, the lock clicked open, and I lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of papers, all yellowed with age, and at the very top was a small, black and white photograph. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I stared at the image. It was of my father and Henry Blackwell. But they weren't just business partners in this photo. They were standing side by side in front of the warehouse, both smiling. And there was something else. Between them, on a pedestal, was a small, glass vial, glowing faintly in the light. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the scene. What was in the vial? And why had it been so important that my father and Henry had kept it hidden for all these years? The answer lay in the papers beneath the photograph. I shuffled through them, my heart racing as I read the first page. It was a journal entry, written by Henry Blackwell. Asterisk, the vial contains something far more valuable than any business deal, more dangerous than any treasure. We discovered it in the ruins of a lost civilization, hidden away for centuries. And now, with Carter's help, we have ensured it will never fall into the wrong hands. But the world is changing, and it's time to decide whether it should remain a secret, or whether someone like Emily is ready to handle the truth. Asterisk. I closed my eyes, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me. My father had been involved in something far beyond anything I had imagined, something that had the power to change everything. The vial, the secret, the key, it all led here. But I had no idea what I was supposed to do next. One thing was clear, I couldn't let this secret remain buried. The truth needed to be known. And whatever danger lay ahead, would face it head-on. I stood there, frozen, the journal entry in my hands, the weight of Henry Blackwell's words sinking in. Something far more valuable than any business deal, the vial they had hidden, the thing that had brought them together and kept them in the shadows for so long, was far beyond my understanding. What could be so dangerous, so valuable, that it had to be kept secret for all these years? A knot tightened in my stomach. I couldn't ignore this. My father's involvement in something this monumental, it was too much to turn away from. If I didn't uncover the full story, I would be left with endless questions, and the past would continue to haunt me. But the fear of what this vial represented, also gnawed at me. It wasn't just about money or power. There was something more, something ancient and possibly dangerous, that my father and Henry Blackwell had kept buried for decades. I carefully placed the photograph back in the chest and gathered the papers. I couldn't leave without more answers. The last thing I wanted was to walk away and let this secret slip through my fingers. I flipped through the papers one by one, but none seemed to provide more immediate answers. Some of them were old contracts, financial documents related to investments my father and Henry had made together. Others were more cryptic, sketches of ruins, references to expeditions, and notes about a discovery. Asterisk, what discovery? What was this civilization they'd uncovered, asterisk, and why was my father involved? As I sifted through the documents, I caught a flash of movement outside the corner of my eye. A figure was standing at the warehouse entrance, silhouetted against the fading light. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly shoved the papers back into the chest, closing it with a soft click. Without thinking, I crouched down behind some old crates, my breathing shallow as I watched the figure approach. Was it Lisa? Had she followed me here? Or was it someone else, someone more dangerous? I waited in the silence, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Whoever it was, they knew exactly where they were going. My thoughts raced, trying to figure out if I could confront them or if I needed to flee. Then, I heard a familiar voice, one that made my blood run cold. Emily. It was Mr. Thompson. My mind whirled. Why was he here? He had been cautious, almost warning me when I left his office. Had he known more than he was letting on? Had he been watching me all this time? Or worse, was he involved in whatever secret my father had kept? I stepped out from behind the crates, trying to steady my nerves. Mr. Thompson turned to face me, his expression unreadable. Mr. Thompson. I asked, trying to mask the tension in my voice. What are you doing here? He paused, then stepped forward. I should have known you'd find this place, Emily. Your father was a stubborn man, and I always knew you had his drive. I felt a chill run through me. What do you mean? What's going on here? Mr. Thompson's gaze hardened. Your father never wanted you involved in this, but it seems you've been drawn into it regardless. He wasn't just a businessman. He was part of something far bigger. And now you're carrying his legacy, whether you're ready for it or not. I took a step back, shaking my head. Legacy? What are you talking about? What was so important that my father and Henry Blackwell had to hide it all these years? He looked around cautiously before stepping closer. You're holding the key to a secret that has the power to change the world. Your father and Henry weren't just partners in business, they were part of an organization that uncovered something ancient. Something that's been lost for centuries. I swallowed, trying to process his words. Lost? What is it? What's in the vial? Mr. Thompson's face softened for a moment, as if he were considering how much to reveal. The vial holds a substance, an artifact, that could unlock abilities no one has had in generations. It was part of an ancient civilization that predates recorded history, and your father and Henry were among the few who knew of its existence. They made sure it stayed hidden, for fear of what might happen if the wrong people found it. I took a deep breath. This was all too much. The world my father had been part of, the secrets, the danger, it was all so far beyond what I had ever imagined. But now it was my reality. I had to make a choice. Why are you here? I asked, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. What do you want? Mr. Thompson looked at me seriously. I'm here because I need your help, Emily. There are people out there, dangerous people, who want what your father and Henry kept hidden. I've spent years trying to keep it under wraps, but now that you're involved, things are moving faster than I can control. You have the key, and that means you have a choice to make. I narrowed my eyes, my grip tightening around the vial's key. What kind of choice? He took a step back, his expression conflicted. You can either help us protect it, ensure that the vial stays hidden and safe, or you can risk unleashing it to the world. Either way, there are people watching you, and they won't stop until they get what they want. I felt a cold shiver race down my spine. This was it, the point of no return. I looked at the warehouse around me, at the papers, at the chest, and at the vial that had the potential to change everything. I had no idea what the future held, but I couldn't walk away from this. Not now. I'll protect it, I said, the words coming out with more conviction than I felt. Whatever it takes, I'll make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. Good. But be careful, Emily. The people after it are closer than you think. As I stood there, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders, I knew one thing for certain, this was just the beginning. The world I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a web of secrets, danger, and a legacy that would shape everything to come. And I was in the middle of it all. The decision was made, but the path ahead remained uncertain. As I left the warehouse with Mr. Thompson by my side, I felt the weight of the key in my pocket. Every step I took seemed to echo in the vast, silent world around me. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the road ahead. Mr. Thompson was quiet, his face tense as he walked beside me. He seemed as though he was carrying a burden heavier than the secrets he'd already revealed. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. I know this is a lot to take in, he said finally, breaking the silence. But there's one more thing you need to understand, Emily. This isn't just about the vial or the artifact. It's about the people who want it, and the power they wield. I glanced at him, wondering what he meant. But before I could ask, we arrived at an old, nondescript car parked at the edge of the warehouse lot. We need to get somewhere safe, he continued. There are people who are watching us right now. And if they know we're onto them, things could get ugly. I nodded, feeling the adrenaline start to build in my veins. I had no idea who these people were, but I wasn't about to let them take what my father had worked so hard to protect. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, winding through back roads and small towns. My mind raced as I thought about the enormity of what I had become involved in. There was no going back now. The vial, the key, the ancient artifact, it was all tied together in a way I could barely understand, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't trust anyone fully, not even Mr. Thompson. Finally, we reached a secluded cabin in the woods, much like the one by the lake, but smaller and more fortified. Mr. Thompson led me inside, where the walls were lined with maps, photographs, and documents, all scattered across a long table in the center of the room. "This is our base of operations," he said. "Here, we track the people after the vial. We've been trying to stay one step ahead, but things are getting harder. Whoever's behind this is relentless." I could feel the tension in the air. The urgency was palpable. "What exactly do you want me to do?" I asked. Mr. Thompson hesitated before answering. "I need you to help us track down the people who are after the vial. There's a network, an underground group that's been trying to get their hands on it for years. They think the vial can unlock something far more powerful than we can imagine. And if they succeed, well, we can't let that happen." I sat down at the table, my fingers tracing the edges of the old map spread out before me. "Where do we start?" "We start by finding the vial's location," he said. "But the people after it know about the map your father drew. They'll be looking for the same clues. We have to stay ahead of them." The next few days were a blur of information and planning. We followed leads, studied the documents my father had left behind, and worked through every possible scenario. But with each passing hour, I felt the pressure mounting. The people after the vial were getting closer, and they were becoming more dangerous. On the 5th day, as I was studying a particularly detailed map of an ancient ruin that my father and Henry Blackwell had explored, I found something, a hidden passage. It was marked with a symbol I recognized from the photograph in the wooden chest. The ruins had been excavated, but this passage was never mentioned in any of the records. "This is it," I said, pointing to the map. "This is where they hid it." Mr. Thompson's eyes widened as he examined the map. "I didn't know about this. But it makes sense. They would have wanted to keep it secure, hidden from everyone, even from us." We packed our things quickly, knowing that time was running out. The location was deep in the mountains, in a remote area that was nearly impossible to reach without the right equipment. But we had no choice. The vial had to be secured before it fell into the wrong hands. As we made our way to the site, the tension was unbearable. I could feel the weight of the decision I had made, knowing that what we were about to do would change everything. The ancient artifact my father and Henry Blackwell had protected for so long, it was no longer just a relic of the past. It was something that could reshape the future, for better or for worse. We finally reached the entrance to the ruins, a hidden cave entrance that was nearly invisible against the mountain. Mr. Thompson led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the walls of the cave seemed to close in around us. At the end of the tunnel, we found a stone door, intricately carved with symbols that matched the ones in the journal. The key in my pocket felt heavier than ever as I approached the door. Mr. Thompson looked at me, his face set in grim determination. "This is it. You have to unlock it." I inserted the key into the lock, and with a turn, the door creaked open, revealing the chamber beyond. The vial was there, sitting on a pedestal, bathed in soft, golden light. But as I stepped forward, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, heart racing, to see a group of armed men standing at the entrance to the chamber. "You didn't think you could keep it from us forever, did you?" one of them said, his voice cold and ruthless. In that moment, everything seemed to slow. I had a choice: fight for the vial, risk everything to protect it, or walk away and let the darkness take it. I didn't know what the vial held, but I knew it was my father's legacy. And I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. I reached for the vial. The sound of gunfire echoed in the cave. But I didn't stop. I ran, the vial in my hands, the weight of my father's secret heavy on my shoulders. The world had changed, and so had I. This was no longer about business or hidden treasures, it was about a future that could be shaped or destroyed in an instant. And I was the one holding the key. The chase continued, the men behind me relentless, but I was determined to protect what had been entrusted to me. The world would never be the same, but I knew one thing for sure, my father's legacy, whatever it was, would be safe, no matter the cost. The ending. The future. That, I would discover as I moved forward, knowing that the mystery would never truly be solved. But the journey. That had only just begun.